Over this weekend, I had the opportunity to take Gramgrace to the Crow's Nest event for Overdress and play in a 6-round tournament with 63 people. In this 6-round tournament, unfortunately I lost. I was not victorious, but I learned a lot about my Gramgrace Dragon deck for this upcoming Springfest, and I want to showcase to you guys the build that I took for that event. Now, since that tournament, I haven't made any changes to the deck, but if you guys are interested in seeing an updated list of it in the future, I'll definitely give that a try, but you have to let me know down in the comment section below if you guys want me to keep playing with Gramgrace. In this tournament, I had the opportunity to play 6 rounds with Swiss, and I have all of my matchups lined up over my phone, and towards the end of the video, I will discuss after the deck profile my thoughts on each round that I played and the current meta based off the final results. Without further ado, guys, I'll go ahead and showcase the deck profile, and then we'll come back to this to discuss my thoughts on the tournament as well as the meta shaping up and my matchups in the end of the deck profile. Starting off with the ride deck, I'm playing 1 Wingal Brave, 1 Little Sage Marin, as well as 1 Blaster Dark. My initial thoughts with this ride line going into the tournament was that Marin was going to provide me the free resource of Wingal Brave versus Blaster Javelin's cost from deck. Gramgrace going into the later game does have the potential of decking you out if you are drawing too many cards or playing too many search cards, so I figured to save me potentially a trigger or a unit that I can use later via another effect, or just keep a card in my deck, I would just use Marin's effect to get the free shuffle and the Wingal Brave from Soul. Now, I understand that lately this has not been a popular option considering the fact that Little Sage Marin does take a copy of a card out from your soul, which for a deck like Gramgrace that wants to utilize Counterblast and Soul all the time, you essentially want to make sure that you always have the resources accessible to your Vanguard. But truthfully, with the way that I have my deck built and the way that I utilize all the resources with my cards, this was not an issue for me during the tournament. There was not once where I was like, damn, I wish I would play Javelin over this. No, that has not happened to me at all yet, and I'm actually very genuinely happy with my ride line. The only thing that I would say that might make me change my mind is that I've recently been put on after looking into Japanese deck list of the Genesis ride line. That ride line will give you the additional, I believe, 2 cards in Soul, which essentially takes out 2 cards from your deck, which is no different than Blaster Javelin, but the difference here is the fact that you essentially get another Vanguard that doesn't cost anything for CB wise, so your opponent doesn't have the potential of damage denying you with your Gramgrace, unlike your Blaster Dark, where if you have another rearguard in play, they can swing into that and prevent your Gramgrace from going off. We don't want that to happen, so that is just an idea that is in my head, but overall I'm very satisfied with my ride line, and there is nothing else that I would change about it throughout the tournament after being played. For our very first grade 3, we are playing the star of the show, Sword Saint Knight Dragon Gramgrace. Now, this card I was actually super excited to go with. I feel like Gramgrace, truthfully speaking, is very rogue and super underrated in this current meta. Gramgrace has late game power, it's key to Sanctuary so you have access to early game rush, and the fact that this card essentially gives you a +1 in terms of benefits every single turn on top of the 10,000 power to back row and front row, which does matter a lot, is insane. To me, the thing about Gramgrace that makes this deck really good is the fact that because you have the late game push and the consistent drawing of cards, you are always keeping your hand full and you are keeping anything that you play in column, turning it automatically into a magic number. Being able to give essentially 20,000 power per column means that even if you had a column of a 10,000 unit, 8,000 unit, or 2 8,000 units, you are making those columns automatically above 33,000, which is a huge magic number in Overdress. You get past the front trigger with that. I believe that's 1 trigger away from 2 15,000 point shields, and it basically just makes any of your other power-up cards a lot scarier because anything at this point already passes the baseline of a magic number being 33,000. And as you guys know, shield values in Overdress are weird, so this card, again, being able to make anything super strong means that at any point in the game, when you Persona Ride into this, every single card in your hand, even triggers, can become valuable because they can turn anything into a magic column. And I think that's the scariest thing about Gramgrace is the fact that in the later game, this card really pushes super hard and you maintain that consistency depending on how you choose to play your deck. Because of the way that I think the meta is going, I chose a very early game rush strategy and I wanted to Persona Ride into Gramgrace as soon as possible, which will explain the purpose of this next card that I'm about to showcase. I am playing 1 copy of Gradius Grottle. Now, like I stated earlier with Gramgrace, the value of Persona Riding is just too important to not have. Gramgrace being able to Persona Ride every single turn is absolutely necessary for this deck to be successful. And unfortunately, it's the biggest weakness of this deck as well, is the fact that it doesn't really do anything good if you don't Persona Ride. So having the one copy of this always accessible to you via other card effects I'll showcase in the deck means that Gramgrace will have another opportunity to get Persona Ride. So we're playing 4 copies of Persona Ride cards in this deck, which are the 3 grade 3s, and then 1 copy of this card to guarantee we'll always have access to Gramgrace's full power. For my last grade 3, I am playing 4 copies of Knight of War Damage Fasado. Knight of War Damage Fasado is, so far in my opinion, one of the strongest grade 3s of Keter Sanctuary. Being able to not be chosen via card effects and providing an on-hit benefit of Soul Charge Countercharge means that at any point in the game that this card makes a successful attack against our opponent, we essentially always have access to Gramgrace. And my idea behind maxing this card out for the deck is the fact that I do play a card that can potentially give you another copy of it if you have the condition set up properly, and the fact that this card's on-hit effect gives you automatic access to Gramgrace's effect as well and applies pressure because it's on-hit, too good to pass up. This card is good against Eugene, because there are some people who do choose to play that, and in the tournament it was especially good against decks like Flagburg and Ava. Because Flagburg and Ava, those cards, since they like to retire / bind units, I need to have cards on the board that I could consistently rely on throughout the entirety of all of my matchups, and these cards just get the job done. So making sure that I have units that are always accessible to me or protected is super important, especially for Gramgrace, because you really want a full board to take advantage of our Vanguard, and this card just does the job perfectly. Moving on to the grade 2s, I'm going to showcase my favorite one of the deck, which is 4 copies of Divine Sister Lagundecket. Now, Divine Sister Lagundecket is honestly insane in Gramgrace, and I think she works better in this deck than any other Keter deck. The beauty of this card is that combined with Gramgrace's ability, this card turns any column you play her in into a magic number hitter. Her effect to get 5,000 power and boost if there's a grade 3 in the soul consistently means that even on non-Persona Ride turns, this card will turn any column that has a 13 or a 10k into it above a 23k defense marker, essentially making every single column she swings into past 10,000 shield, which is a magic number against your opponent because it demands they guard with more triggers against this card's attack. And behind Fasado, it makes 28k, and in the later game, it's 48,000. So this card is just insane at making those super strong numbers to break your opponent's defenses. And if you're going first with Gramgrace and you finally get the first Persona Ride, you're really going to want at least 1 to 2 of these on the board to make those weaker rearguard columns you may or may not have just a little bit better. And she just does this perfectly. I think choosing to play her at 4 was a little overkill. The idea behind it was that combined with the next card that I'm going to showcase, I can increase my chances of seeing it, and then putting a grade 3 in there via me not even needing to call another copy of this card just means I can always turn it on. So my other card correlates by turning this card on via activating her continuous effect with its own skill that I'll showcase now, because they just work so well together. For the grade 2 MVP, we have Knight of Piercing Cadwaya. Now, at the time I'm making this video, Calibres are about $35 a piece, and that's still way past my budget for any individual card. I don't care how good the card is. I will not drop $120 for a playset of simply 4 cards. I just won't do it. So Cadwaya came in the role that I wanted Cardbray to serve, and I actually think I like Cadwaya just a little bit better. This card being a Soul Blast 1 and then being accessible to you during the early game or late game or any period this card comes out, combining the fact that there's a little trick you can do with Gramgrace's ability to get additional resource, is insane. This card helps me fetch out Persona Ride, helps me get extra draw, and if need be, it's not something that conflicts with any sort of situation where you don't have the damage or resources to take advantage of Gramgrace or Cardbray's full skill. After all, that is a lot of counterblast in Keter Sanctuary, and with this deck particularly, we don't have so much, or I don't believe I played any countercharge cards because I didn't feel it necessary. I wanted to allocate all of my counterblast to Gramgrace to make sure that my Vanguard was at full power anytime I needed to be. So therefore, playing cards that like counterblast 1 to benefit me, like Sadie or Cardbray, they're good and they are super strong cards. I won't take them away from them, except maybe Sadie or the Order card, but those cards all require CB. And that means that my opponent would have the option of letting limiting how much benefit I get from my counterblast throughout certain periods of the game. So Kadwaya essentially being a free add to hand because of the ratios in this deck, and then a +1 draw for Gramgrace is insane. This card just benefited so much to me throughout the entirety of the tournament, and it was the saving grace and honestly the main way I recovered my Persona Ride pieces throughout all 6 of my games. For my final grade 2, guys, I am playing 3 copies of Drilling Angel. Now, Drilling Angel is honestly the best card in this deck. I'm not even going to front. This card being able to put a grade 3 in the soul means that we can turn on our Lagum Decades. We always have soul accessible for our Caliwells, and it potentially being able to call out another piece means that we essentially have a free superior caller that can potentially give us extra pieces on board that don't minus from our hand via Gramgrace's effect. Even though Gramgrace draws one and draws you another one, which essentially makes it a +1, this card being able to give you another free +1 on the board as well as soul means that you can put a Fasado in there, turn on your Lagum Decades to the rear guard, and potentially get another Fasado, which means you'll have an on-hit counter charge and soul charge card that will make your opponent's turn after, when we go back to ours, a lot worse. Or if we just need the extra Fasados, that's cool too, or the extra soul, that's cool too. But I've never been in a situation where I need to drop this card specifically to get the extra soul to do that. The fact that it just potentially can give you a free +1 on the board just makes it so insane, as a lot of this deck is free. So we want to make sure that the cards that we do play CB with get all the attention that they deserve and need. Moving on to grade 1s, I'm playing 1 copy of Elementaria and 3 copies of Aegis Mare Dragon. This is just your typical D-Series Sentinel stand-up. I feel as though Elementaria, at least the one of it, is perfectly fine. Well, you can only play one of it in your deck. I think it's perfectly fine. This card gets over any potential grade 4 matchups that I might have. I don't think that I'll see too much. I think that with the combination of Magnolia being interrupted and the new set coming out and not having the best support for the Jiva strategy or Chakbari Divine Dragon strategy, I think that playing it like this is perfectly okay. This is your typical D-Series Perfect Guard lineup. You play the 1 Elementaria to get past any grade 4 matchups, and then you play the 3 Aegis Mare Dragon to just for a natural Perfect Guard benefit. Overall, nothing I would change with this. For my next grade 1, I am playing 4 copies of Knights of Gale Cymbulgar. So this card is actually really interesting. Crow actually suggested to me that I play this card because what he was talking about was, and something I understood throughout the event now that I've played through it, was the fact that a lot of decks in Overdress right now are very susceptible to rush. A lot of them do not like rush or being rushed on their first grade 1 turn or grade 2 turns because they need that time to set up for their other plays in the later game, and that requires CB, that requires resources and other cards from hand they don't want to sacrifice. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I'm just super tired. I'm making this video like 2 o'clock in the morning. But going back to Cymbulgar, this other grade 1 in the deck essentially is a rush piece. You drop this card down in the early game as a grade 1 to rush with, and then the later game, by giving itself 5,000 power, it does the same thing as Lagum Decade does, which means it turns itself into a magic number booster or hitter. This card gives 13k, and behind Lagum Decade that makes a 28k column, so puts it together, that's a 48,000 power column. Even if you don't have that, you can put this card in the early game behind your other columns that need it, such as your Fasado, your Caliwells, or if you don't have the CB ever for whatever strange reason to use Gramgrace's skill, you can turn this card essentially into a 23k booster with your 23k Vanguard to hit for 46,000. For my last grade 1, I am playing 3 copies of Painkiller Angel. Now, Painkiller Angel is an interesting card because this card is perfectly balanced for what Gramgrace wants to do and the way that the deck is going. Having this card being an early game attacker along with Cymbulgar, and then having it potentially, if not retire from battle, turn itself into an additional booster for a 1 card benefit is super helpful for Gramgrace. You want to make sure that you have as many ways to get access to your Persona Ride as possible. So if you need to drop this card down in the early game with your Blaster Darks, and maybe some other cards, even play it like this so that you can get additional 2 card draw, sometimes you have to do that. I personally have been blessed enough to never do that. Only 1 card has really succeeded me in getting my Persona Rides, and that is Caliwell, which is why I'm super in love with that card. That is Caliwell. This is just another way to filter out the deck. It is an extender for Gramgrace, and I think that is super helpful if you want to keep playing a version of fast drawing cards or very quick rushing with it. I don't think it has a permanent spot in the deck, but I will say that this is a card that until I find something better to trade it out with, I'm very happy with the ratios of Painkiller Angels that I decided to play for this event. Moving on to our triggers, I play 4 copies of Healer of Heavenly Staff Arches. Then for the deck, I play 8 criticals, 4 copies of Knights of Heavenly Hammer Gurgant, and then I play 4 copies of Blade Feather Dragon. And with only 2 types of trigger left, I figured I'd go ahead and showcase them all at once. We have Bard of Heavenly Song Outpick, your 20k front trigger Guardian, and then your Keter Sanctuary over trigger. Now I know a lot of people are not a fan of the Keter Sanctuary over trigger. I actually like it for Gramgrace. And the reason why I like it for Gramgrace is because if you reveal it on turn 4 or 5, or your first basically grade 3 turn and your Persona Ride turn, this card, or even in the early game, this card does a lot. It helps you get all those extra card advantages so you can start filtering your deck out for those pieces via your perfect over trigger. And the over trigger sometimes just comes and saves the day. Nothing to complain about there. It's the beauty of it for standard. Now that we've gone through the deck profile, I'll go ahead and discuss some of the matchups and my thoughts on each matchup that I played for the tournament. Now, my first match in the tournament, I played against Minerva, and both me and my opponent were playing very well. The deck is extremely consistent, and it was really nice to have an opportunity to play against a deck that, although I wasn't too familiar with, I was very able to get by in my first match as I was victorious. Both me and my opponent over-triggered each other during our attack phase of the game, so we had the opportunity to take advantage of the Keter Sanctuary over-triggers effect to boost our hands up, but towards that final Persona Ride turn, the additional push from my cards and the cards he drew from his drive checks just weren't enough to defend him towards the end. Now in my second matchup of the tournament, I had the opportunity to play against Ava, and this was a deck that I actually felt very comfortable with going into the tournament. Since everybody's been playing it a lot lately, I've become pretty familiar with some of the deck lists and ideas and the flow of the deck because it's something I've had a lot of practice with, both in like real life, Deer Days, and just some videos I've seen online. So I was very comfortable with the matchup. Unfortunately, my deck was not on my side that day, because in that matchup I drew in a lot of triggers, so I couldn't early game rush them and take the advantage of. And towards the later game, when I was able to go into Gramgrace's first Persona Ride turn, because my hand was just loaded with triggers, I was not able to mount a proper offense, and my opponent was victorious against me because there was nothing I could do to make any sort of push against their 4 attack plays and the extra defense they get from their obscurated glitter clones. In my third matchup, I played against Flagburg. Now, Flagburg was a deck I honestly didn't expect to see. I knew it got new support, but I figured with what I was thinking about walking into, which is playing against Ava and Jet, I didn't expect to see any Flagburgs at all, and if I did, maybe like 1 or 2, and this is just the 1 or 2 that I saw. Now, this Flagburg is actually really interesting, and I wish the player was a content creator so that I could, shout him out, but he beat me because I was simply thrown off by the entire matchup. Now, normally with Flagburg, I know their game plan, but this person played a very weird, literally Flagburg Rorowa hybrid deck. And how it worked was you take advantage of the Rorowa ride line, but he was playing Radalina in his deck as well, the grade 2 variation. And he was using these cards to apply an early game rush. And because of the Momoke token and the glitter, he essentially got 4 attacks for only 1 CB during that turn. And with the extra plant tokens on his board, he didn't have to expend any cards from his hand besides one Radalina to get that extra push in. And it just threw me off because I thought I was playing against Rorowa, and me playing that deck, I'm very familiar with it. So I had a matchup idea for Rorowa, but when he finally dropped the Flagburg on me and the Flagburg cards, it threw the entire matchup off, and I just wasn't ready for that first Flagburg turn, and I ended up losing my rear guards, and he still had a huge hand because he wasn't dropping cards onto the board, because he still had the plant tokens in the back to boost his rear guards. So it was just like, his first Flagburg turn was just super strong, and there was nothing I could do, and it was downhill for me there because, again, I was In this game, like towards after the first Flagburg turn, I was drawing in more triggers for attacks. Like literally game 2 through 4 that I'm going to discuss, me drawing a full of triggers is honestly like default to many of my games, because when you're drawing consistently into triggers, I'm not going to drop triggers onto the board, especially in like first grade 3 turn to mount an offense when I'm hoping for extra pieces. My Kadwayas came in once in a while and they gave me a piece or two there, but not getting that full board with Gramgrace really hurt, and it was my downfall for round 2 through 4. So, but the Flagburg matchup, this one was fair because towards the later game I did get some pieces, but I wasn't prepared for Flagburg, so I just got beat by that. And then going into my 4th game, I played against a Youthberk player. It was sort of the same thing. The Youthberk player, he actually admitted, like we both were like, you got the perfect hand, like literally like perfect Youthberk hand. Like Sequanas came in early, Waywards came in early, freaking Maple came in early. Like literally he had all his pieces, and when he finally went into his first Tempest turn, the push was just too hard that when I finally went into my first Gramgrace turn, I just couldn't mount a proper offense against it, and there was nothing that I could do towards the end of the game. In my last matchup for round 6, I played against a Chronojet player, and I was victorious against that because at that point I guess my deck decided to finally stop sleeping, and I was drawing my early game rush pieces, and I just knew the matchup very well because I've become so familiar with seeing Chronojet and people playing Chronojet and talking about it all day. I was prepared for this one. Plus, my opponent wasn't very familiar with the deck as well, and the way that they were playing the deck, it wasn't to its full potential. So I will say that this was also because my opponent didn't have the best matchup knowledge, but I also understood the matchup, and I did have the pieces, at least in this game, to mount a proper counterattack or go with the proper offense, as I was the first player to go in this matchup for the Chronojet, against the Chronojet battle. Even though I was not victorious at this crow's nest, I actually had a lot of fun. It was nice to play Vanguard in real life again. I had an opportunity to meet some of my favorite content creators, and I got to meet some people who are subscribed to the channel here. Thank you guys so much for the continuous support on the Prime Vanguard channel. We are past 350 subscribers, and it's all thanks to you guys continuing to support me and it is all thanks to you guys continuing to support me on this channel and my growth on the Vanguard journey to becoming the best card fighter that I can be. There's more videos coming up soon, you guys. Just stay tuned for that. I'll catch you later. Peace.